Here we go. I've been doing a survey of the scriptures of the Old Testament, expository survey, and we've worked our way up to the book of Numbers. We've done Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. And so we want to begin with Numbers now. First of all, looking at the title. The title of the book comes again from the Vulgate, Liber Numeri, by way of the Septuagint arithmoi, meaning numbers. This name was no doubt given because of the double senses taken in the book in chapter 1 and chapter 26. The Hebrew title, Bamidbar, is rendered in the desert and is used because it describes where most of the book took place, in the desert, moving up to Sinai. The author, as in the rest of the Pentateuch, the book mentions Moses throughout and connects him as the one through whom the Lord communicated the material. For over 80 times, the phrase, the Lord spoke unto Moses, appears. And notice in Numbers 33:2, Moses is directly stated to have written concerning Israel's journeys. It reads, and Moses wrote their goings out according to their journeys by the commandment of the Lord, and these are their journeys according to their going out. Numbers 33, verse 2. Along with this evidence, local color and authentic wilderness background, with its close connection with the book of Exodus, I believe and understand support the Mosaic authorship, which again is the position of conservative Old Testament scholars, both Christian and Jewish. The date would be the same as with the rest of the Pentateuch or the Torah, during the time in the wilderness wanderings and at the end of that period of time. As to the historical background, Numbers can be studied by first considering the time period involved and the events that took place during that period of time. According to Numbers 1 and 2, Israel took the census in the second month of the second year. Then in Numbers 10:11, we're told they left Sinai on the 20th day of the second month, the second year following the Exodus. They arrived then at the plains of Moab in the 40th year, Numbers 22:1 and 33:50. Thus, the historic background of Numbers is seen to be the last 19 days at Sinai unto the arrival of Israel at the steppes of Moab. In glancing at this background, one uses or one sees the census of the people and the arrangement of the camp. The Israelites then depart from Sinai, and their experience in the wilderness is then recounted. The main incident of rebellion and unbelief at Kadesh Barnea made it necessary for the people to wander in the wilderness for 38 more years. Following this wandering, the Israelites make it to the plains of Moab, where they intermarry and idolatry resolves through the influence of Balaam worship. Following this, the new generation of Israel was then numbered, and Yahweh began to prepare the people of that generation for the entering into Canaan and the division of the promised land. All of the events from chapter 20 on took place in the 40th year of Israel's history as the Lord gave commandments to Moses at Moab. This is in Numbers 36:13. And it concerns the nation of Israel and its relationship to the future at that time. The purpose of the book of Numbers is to relate the experience of Israel from their departure at Sinai to their arrival at the plains of Moab. The purpose is clearly seen as the book describes the 19 days when a census was taken, and then proceeds to narrate Israel's experience from Sinai through the wilderness wanderings into the arrival at Moab. It describes the intervening 38 years between Exodus and Deuteronomy and the divine testing of God's people, especially during this time. The highlight of the book, again, is seen in the event of Kadesh Barnea. Because of unbelief at Kadesh Barnea, trial and testing followed, which led to the defeat and eventual death of many. The book stands as a continual warning then to all believers of the terrible consequences and results of unbelief and rebellion against the Lord. In terms then of the argument or flow of thought of the book, the theme then of the book of Numbers is the wilderness wandering. The book can be divided into basically, I believe, 4 major sections. The first section deals with the preparation of Israel for the wilderness journey. Chapter 1, verse 1 through 10, verse 10. This begins with the numbering of the children of Israel, as well as the arrangement of the camp for marching, including the arrangement and ministration of the Levites in chapter 1 through 4. From here, the book then deals with purity in the camp in 5 and 6, giving regulations concerning the evil practices that might arise in the camp, as well as information concerning the Nazirite vow. Under the discussion of the Nazirite vow, the author treats the vow itself, the penalty for defilement of the Nazirite vow, and the law of the Nazirite, and finally concludes chapter 6 with the Aaronic benediction. By the way, I love that benediction in Hebrew. Yivarech Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav alecha, v'hunecha, Yisa Adonai panav alecha, v'yasem lecha shalom. Beautiful benediction. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord lift up his face to you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his face towards you and bring you shalom or peace. As we go on, Moses then gives the worship of the camp in chapter 7, 1 through 9:14, where he discusses the offerings of the princes, the lighting of the lamps, the consecration of the Levites, the celebration of Pesach, the Passover, and the manifestation of the cloud and fire in chapter 9, as God's provision for their guidance in the wilderness journey. The section is then concluded by a discussion concerning silver trumpets in chapter 10. The second major section of the book deals with the journey of Israel then from Sinai to the wilderness of Paran, chapter 10, 11 through 14:45. Within this section, the procession to Kadesh Barnea is given which includes the departure from Sinai in chapter 10 into chapter 10, the murmuring at Taberah, and the lusting that took place in Kivrot Chadavahu in chapter 11, the murmuring of Miriam and Aaron against Moses and his leadership, and the vindication of Yahweh because of it. Following this, the book in chapters 13 and 14 consider the sin of rebellion at Kadesh Barnea. Here we understand the author narrates, for example, the mission of the spies, their report, and the response of unbelief by the people. Because of this unbelief and rebellion, notice God judges them, and they were not permitted to enter into the land of Canaan, except the only two, Joshua and Caleb. It is interesting, the majority report was followed. The minority was rejected. There were giants in the land, it was said, and were not able to go in. And yet the Lord had commanded them to go in. It's interesting in terms of New Testament application. In the book of Hebrews, in that second warning section, in Hebrews chapter 7 through part of chapter 4, we see that warning to the writers or to the people that the writer of Hebrews is writing to keep on keeping on in Christ, and don't go back to religious ritual and leaving your pursuing of Jesus Christ. And he uses Kadesh Barnea as an example, and says, don't be like them, for they perished in the desert, but be like those that would go on. And I think this can have an application today. We need to go on with Jesus Christ. We're seeing so many times that people are leaving Christianity, leaving their relationship to Christ, at least leaving what they said was their relationship to Christ. There's debate as to whether they really had a genuine relationship or not. But at any rate, we're seeing a lot of deconversions going on. And that's where I think Kadesh Barnea gives warning. Don't leave Christ. And the writer of Hebrews then picks that up and applies it to his audience. The third major section then follows and treats the wanderings in the wilderness following Kadesh Barnea. This is in chapter 15:1 through 20:29. After giving legislation, for example, concerning Canaan, the section narrates the rebellion of Korah and God's demonstration of Aaron as his high priest by the divine sign of the rod that blossomed. I think this is a basic type of Jesus Christ in the New Testament, who is a living high priest because of the resurrection. And the blossoming rod, I think, looks at life. And we're told in Hebrews chapter 7 that because Jesus is resurrected, he is an eternal priest and is the one who fulfills the requirement of an eternal priest. After demonstrating this, the book deals within the basic regulations of priesthood in chapter 18 and gives the basic then regulations of the red heifer offering, which was an offering that had to do with the cleansing of the people in chapter 19. It then concludes by giving a summary of some of the incidents up to Mount Hor in chapter 20. In chapter 21, in chapter 20, the book deals with the death of Miriam, the sin of Moses in striking the rock twice. Uh, Many have wondered, why was Moses judged so strongly with that? And it may be that he acted in disobedience to the Lord, and some have suggested that the rock smitten twice was not necessary. He only needed to speak to the rock in obeying the Lord. Again, an emphasis upon obedience. The sin of Edom is then permitting the Israelites the privilege. The sin of Edom is not permitting the Israelites the privilege of passing through their land. And so there is a final judgment upon Edom. And the final, can I say, part of this second or this third movement speaks of the death of Aaron at Mount Hor in chapter 20. The fourth then and final section of the book covers the journey of Israel from Mount Hor to Transjordan. We see this in chapter 21:1 through 36:13. This section can be easily subdivided into two minor sections. The first minor section treats the journey of Israel from Mount Hor to the steeps of Moab. The discussing of the victory of Israel over Arad, the Canaanite, the murmuring sin of the people, and the brazen serpent. I want to stop there a minute. Notice when there is this disobedience that takes place, the Lord, many of the people were dying. And so the Lord allowed for a serpent to be put up. And if they would look upon this serpent, they would live. And I'm reminded of John 3, where Jesus says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert and had life, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever then believes in him would have life. So there's a wonderful New Testament fulfillment of this. And I believe this is a type of Christ being lifted up upon the cross. This is followed then by their march to Pisgah and the victory over the two kings of Sihon and Og in chapter 21. The second subdivision is on the plains of Moab, 22:1 to 36:13. And their experience here conclude the narrative of the book of Numbers. First, one then reads of the incident of Balaam, and this is in chapter 22 through 25:18, in which the story of Balaam is recounted. It is interesting in this, one sees how God preserved Israel from being cursed, which is what Balak wanted, as well as from the corrupting influence that Baal worship would have had on the Israelites. It is interesting when you think of Balaam, God told him not to go. And yet when he was offered a little more, can I say, money, he decided that he would go. And the donkey, he speaks to the donkey speaks to him. There was a sword of the Lord standing before the donkey, and the donkey could see it, but the Balaam was not even able to see it. And I always get amused at reading that text where the donkey is smarter than Balaam. And he starts beating his donkey, and the donkey says, haven't I been a good donkey to you? Why are you doing this? It always amused me as I read that. But I think the point is that Balaam was going against the Lord, and he was only going to give him then what we might say his permissive will, but not his ideal will. Balaam then becomes a depiction in the New Testament, especially in Revelation and also in the book of Jude, of a prophet who is in it for money. And it's spoken of as the heir of Balaam. So what a challenge, not to do ministry just to enrich ourselves, but because of our fidelity and love for the Lord. From here, a new census of Israel is taken. That's the second one in 26. And then we have other things occurring, like the law of inheritance is discussed in 27. A new leader is appointed for Moses in chapter 27. And various regulations are given then concerning offerings and vows, 28 through 30, verse 16. The author then next announces the judgment to be administered against the Midianites, chapter 31, narrates the settlement of the land given to Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh in chapter 32, and then retraces the journeys of Israel from Egypt to their present location in Moab. Following this, the book concludes by discussing various plans for settlement in Canaan. This is in chapter 33 through 35:3. Plans concerning entering into the land, the division of the land, the possession of the Levites, the protection of the manslayer are discussed. And finally, the book is concluded by giving the regulations for the inheritance of women who might marry from another tribe in chapter 36. The book covers then about 39 years of wilderness experience. It begins with the numbering of the people at Mount Sinai and concludes with them being on the plains of Moab, ready to enter into Canaan. If we look at an outline of the book, we could say the preparation for the wilderness journey would be the first point in the outline. This is followed then, after the preparation for the journey, we have then the journey from Sinai to the wilderness of Paran in chapter 10, 11, verses 14, or chapter 14, verse 45. Then we have the wanderings in the wilderness, chapter 15, 1 through 20, 29, as they wander in the wilderness, and then the journey finally to Transjordan. And that would take place in 21 through 36, verse 13. So that would be a sort of a summary of the basic outline. If we're looking at Christology, which I'm trying to do in all of this basic overview, I would say two things come to mind. First of all, we have Kadesh Barnea, which gives a warning in the New Testament, especially the book of Hebrews, of going on with Christ. Don't leave because of unbelief, the writer of Hebrews is saying, but press on with Jesus. Then there is also the brazen serpent in Numbers 21, which becomes a type of Christ upon the cross, as we have said in John chapter 3, verses 14 and 16. So what a very interesting book. It's a book about journey, and it's a book about being in the desert. It's a very long book in Hebrew, and looking at a number of miscellaneous areas. But again, I love that Aaronic benediction that has been stated over and over in church worship services. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord lift up his face to you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his face towards you and bring shalom or peace to you.